you. Somebody, yeah. Good morning. Oh, we did better. I'm going to try one more time. Good morning. Good morning. There's a great bishop greeting. Welcome to Alumni Weekend 2015. We're so thrilled to have all of you on campus. And a special shout out to those of you who are celebrating your 50th reunion this year from the class of 1965. It's my honor today to introduce our academic dean. So if you haven't met Dr. Marty Eisenberg, that is his role at the university. We're thrilled to have him at Ohio Wesleyan. I confess, the older I get, the more notes I have to take. So in today's technology, pardon me, it's on my phone rather than on a piece of paper. But Marty has been at Ohio Wesleyan since 2013, so a couple of years now, and has really made an impact, especially on the topic that we're going to talk about today, the Ohio Wesleyan connection. Previously, Dr. Eisenberg was the interim dean of the School of Arts and Letters, associate provost and associate professor of economics at Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. While there, he planned and implemented the Truman Center for Academic Excellence. At Ohio Wesleyan, Dr. Eisenberg has maintained OWU's tradition of academic excellence, including establishing the Student Symposium so that students from every major department and program have the opportunity on campus to share their work and academic accomplishments. I first met Marty when he was on my search committee, so obviously Dr. Eisenberg is a really, really brilliant man because he hired me. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our featured speaker today, Dr. Marty Eisenberg.
Thank you, Jody, but of course you know that part of liberal arts is learning from your mistakes, right? I'm only kidding. You know, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, but, you know, I just want to know that I'm sparing you because I thought, they said, you know, it's alumni college, maybe people want to relive their college experience, so I thought about what paper do I assign them to do a brief writing exercise. So just be prepared. I did prepare a quiz for the end of the class. But no, getting a little bit more seriously, talking about the liberal arts is one of my favorite things to do. And so I thought a little bit about how would I do that with this audience. And I decided I was going to do it the same way that I like to do it when I'm talking to prospective students. So I'm going to give you that pleasure of pretending that you're 17 or 18 years old again, and you're thinking about what kind of educational experience you want. And I want to sit there and say that you want to get a liberal arts experience. And if you're like virtually every 17 and 18-year-old person that I've ever met, say to me, what on earth are you talking about? I have no idea what you mean by liberal arts. So then I give you the classic answer. It's about exposing you to the world's greatest thinking in the arts and sciences. And if your eyes haven't glazed over yet, you start to fall asleep, and you still have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So what I want to try and do in this talk today is for a couple minutes give you a sense of why liberal arts is still incredibly important and why everyone who's a graduate of liberal arts experiences needs to be communicating that message in ways that are understandable. I'm going to try and give you a couple tools that I use to try and make it understandable. And then when I want to spend the latter part talking about how the OWU connection tries to embody this liberal arts kind of approach for students. And so let me start with what I always like to start with, which is a really interesting fact to me. It's 2015. I wish I could say this for the United States, but I can't say it for the United States, but I can say it for Japan. A woman born today in Japan is going to live into the next century. Life expectancy is long enough. And so I always ask people to think about, not about their education for 3 years from now, for graduation or their first job, but to be thinking about, what do you need for a lifetime? What's going to serve you well? And so I ask people to think about not what year you're going to enter the labor market, but what year you're going to leave the labor market. And for a 17, 18-year-old today, we could be talking 2060, maybe even 2070. I hope it's not 2084, because I don't think anybody should have to work that long in their life. But so what is it that will serve someone over their lifetime? And to me, that comes down to things that have stood the test of time. And so the liberal arts, in some ways, at its core, is learning how to learn. Because there is no way we can give you all the information. And if you think about it as facts, in today's world, it's not the facts. We can't give you facts, and we can't give you the knowledge that is going to serve you 50 years from now. So you have to learn how to learn. The way I like to make this concrete for a 17-year-old is I usually pull out my phone and say, okay, let's think about technology for a little bit. If we go back in time, I said, okay, I was a geek in college, and I graduated college over 30 years ago, and we didn't have any personal computers. We had these things that 17-year-olds don't even know that I'm talking about, this thing called the typewriter. I remember it was a big high school graduation gift to my parents, the typewriter to go off to college with. They gave every one of me and my siblings. That was their graduation gift, to set you up for college. And so I was a geek. I actually, my last year of college, pre-personal computers, learned how to use the mainframe computer to word process my senior thesis in college. We're not able to do Google searches. So I said, the change in looking for information. You're probably all familiar with this thing called the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature, right? You ring bells? Yeah. You worked hard to find 10 articles for that paper you were writing in college. Well, today, you go, and probably not the best way of doing it, but the most common way that our students do it, right? You go to Google, you want to search, and if you look at the number at the top, it says 753,000 hits. And so it's changed certain things, but it hasn't changed the need to be able to identify what's important, to have those analytical skills to sort through. How do I know what to believe? How do I know what not to believe? You gotta have a better detector today, because anybody can create a website and put anything up there and probably make it look really good and make it look really official and teach you all sorts of things. So you need a set of skills that allow you to sort those things out. You also need a set of skills that allow you to teach yourself certain things. Because while I can't predict the future with lots of certainty, there are some things I'm very good at predicting. I know from the history of technology that there's going to be new things. So it's safe for me to say that if I just teach you a piece of software, if I teach you how to use a word processing program, and that specific skill of that word processing thing, I'm going to teach you something that will be obsolete in 5 years. Because I don't know what we will be doing in the future, but I'm pretty sure that we will not be using Microsoft Windows 20 years from now. I'm pretty sure whatever Apple version we won't be using, but we still will be using words. We're still going to make arguments to each other. We're still going to have to communicate with each other orally and in writing to convince people of our positions. We're still going to have to analyze things. We're still going to have to be good critical thinkers. We're still going to have to say new information related to things that we know. We're still going to have to be problem solvers. And the liberal arts, fundamentally, is about those things. It's also about asking what kind of person you want to be in the world, and thinking about yourself, figuring out who you are, and what contribution you want to make. Do you want to be the hermit and isolate yourself off? Because then you don't necessarily need to know some of these things. And that's, if you do that, I'm happy if you want to do that, as long as you do it in a reflective way and think about what are the implications of your actions and thinking about what kind of person you want to be. So at a high level, that encapsulates to me what liberal arts is really about, is about those fundamental things that last a long period of time. I didn't give you all the specifics. It includes some math. It includes understanding statistics. It includes understanding this thing called big data, which is not anything new. It's just that we have computing power that allows us to analyze our world in a very different way than we used to. And all of us are leaving digital footprints that other people are analyzing and learning things about ourselves, about us, and making decisions on it. And so you have to be able to sort out what the world is telling you. Another example would be, how many health studies do you actually see? You can see a different health study every day of the week. How do you decide which ones to believe and which ones not to believe? These are good analytical, critical thinking skills that you develop by looking at problems and looking at questions human beings have been asking for thousands of years. They're not new, those questions. Thinking about that knowledge. It's thinking about the process of thinking and the process of learning. So, a way of encapsulating that is this thing we call the OU connection. And it all starts, to me, this is the piece that summarizes it. A piece by William Cronin, and in fact, we asked many of our incoming students, not all of them, someday maybe we'll ask all of them, to actually read the piece that this comes from. And Cronin writes, more than anything else, being an educated person means being able to see connections that allow one to make sense of the world and act within it in creative ways. And I always pause here when I share this with people, because I think that sentence is crucial of what we're about. It says, being able to make connections that make sense of the world. That notion of liberal arts and that root that it stems back from freedom, that it liberates you, comes, and liberation comes because you can make sense of the world and not just feel that the world's acting upon you. That you have that ability. And it's connections that make sense of the world, but it's not enough. The next phrase, and act within it. I mean, I think we're after people who want to make a difference and contribute to solving 21st century problems. Something I push hard. I'm not sure all of us agree on that. When you have a group of faculty and a group of people doing a collective endeavor, one of the strengths of it is the diversity of opinions on how people approach certain things. But to me, that's a crucial thing. And the other phrase that I always think that's important in there, and act within it in creative ways. It takes creativity and developing that creativity to really solve today's challenges. He continues, every one of the qualities I have described here, and these should sound familiar to you, because I don't think your educational experiences were all that different, included listening, reading, talking, writing, puzzle solving, truth seeking. If I were rewriting it, it might be truth in the plural. It's an interesting question of whether truth is singular. Seeing through other people's eyes, that really important quality of empathy, something that the humanities really help people deliver. Develop that skill of seeing through other people's eyes. Why I think we're making a mistake as a society when we shortchange the arts and the humanities, and helping people actually be able to think about how do you understand things from a broader perspective, not just your own perspective. Seeing other people's lives, leading, working in a community, and collaborating is finally about connecting. So at its heart, the liberal arts to us at OU now is about making these skills to be able to connect. Short phrase, one of the ideas is we're after the concept of going from knowledge to action to impact. Sometimes you might have heard this talked about as theory to practice. We struggle with language that's meaningful to people of what we're talking about, what some of those verbs are. At its core, another way of thinking of this is we're about people understanding self and reflective judgment. I've been doing this in higher ed for a long time. It's what attracted me to it is I never want to lose sight of the fact that we work, particularly at OU, with traditional age college students that are a very interesting time in their life. I want to help them find careers. I want to help them find jobs. But I also want to make sure they understand themselves and are thinking about themselves in that process. And thinking about the kind of person they want to be and want to make sure they get that notion of self-reflection. I think sometimes in our society today we lose sight that that's part of becoming educated, is that sense of self. We also want to build a diverse and global perspective, recognize that they're not going to live in a world that looks the same as the world that I grew up in, the world that you grew up in, that it's connected in a different way, that we can't ignore this thing called globalization of crossing boundaries. We want to be able to integrate knowledge across disciplines. Much more education, I'd say, today is thinking about how do you integrate what you know, integrated things you learned in the past, but again, coming back to those connections, and of course, practicing the application of knowledge. It's not just knowledge for knowledge's sake. So how do we do that? Here's my big diagram of the entirety of a student's OU experience. At the center, you see, we have an academic program. We are not abandoning these things of studying a field in depth called a major. We still want people to do that. We offer students lots of choices for those majors. We also have a series of general education requirements. We still want to direct students to learning certain things and developing those skills and not leave everything to chance. But then we've built a whole bunch of experiences around that allow a student to start thinking about themselves and customizing that educational experience for themselves. And it includes, and I'm going to talk in detail about some of these things, honors tutorials and courses. We still have an honors program. It's been in existence since the mid-'80s. For students who really want to challenge themselves, we want them to have an experience where they want to push themselves in a deeper intellectual way. Faculty will teach them a course of students who have similar interests. I think the tutorials are really exciting. Those are for first-year students. They want to start to engage and get involved in a faculty member's research, working together on a problem. There are 5 students working with a faculty member. We limit those to that so that they have that intensity of experience. Lots of opportunities to develop leadership and opportunities in campus engagement. Notice we want people to connect. We overuse the word connect. We want them to connect and recognize that we are a residential experience, that there's learning that takes place outside of the classroom. It's not all about what happens inside a classroom. And I know from having gone to a residential experience that some of my most important lessons did not happen sitting in a classroom. Sometimes it happened with a faculty member outside the classroom, but it also happened with staff members on campus. It also happened with other students. We want to make sure those continue to be part of the students' learning. We also want to recognize that we have a group of students who are very engaged in community. That notion of solving problems means you engage in community and want to encourage students to be involved in community service. And we still are doing mission trips. We were early to this scene. I'd like to talk about those as service-oriented experiences where people give back to the community. There's lots of debate over the word mission and some of its connotations of whether that really describes what we're doing. And that's a current community conversation about what's the appropriate name for that. We also provide funds, and I'm going to share some details on this, for students to take their classroom experiences and see how they work in I hate the phrase the real world, because I think lots of things that happen in a college campus is still the real world, but outside of a classroom context in that more practical experience. A program we call Course Connections, which is an effort to help students integrate and think about how do you take disparate courses and make them relate to each other. Because the last thing we want students to walk away from with OU is to think about their educational experience was the 34 courses in isolation of each other that they took. We wanted to add up to more than just the individual pieces. Course Connections is a part of that. We also have things called travel learning courses, which are courses that say there are things in this world that you need to learn, that you can explore, that you can't learn everything sitting in a room with 4 walls. That you need to take what you're learning and see how does it actually play out in that world. And we're sending students out with faculty to actually do that. And I'm going to give you some examples. And finally, related to theory to practice, we also know that it involves individualized projects. And this can include apprenticeships, internships, but also sometimes you need resources to investigate something. And A lot of this is about providing resources for individuals to be able to explore their interests. Formally, we define the OWU connection into the following kinds of programs. Even though we are broadening this definition, constantly try to broaden it, which is a course, because we realize the more options you give students, the more help you need to give them in actually figuring out what are the appropriate options for them and how to customize that experience. And so we have a course called UC 160 called the OWU Experience, which is designed explicitly for freshmen. It's freshmen only. They work with a faculty member. They start to think about what does their education mean in a broader context and start to plan the kinds of experiences that they want to have, as well as build community and learn some things about the institution. Again, course connections, we'll come back to the theory to practice grants, these projects and travel learning. So, what are these course connections? In fact, we're very happy that the Mellon Foundation has given us a fairly substantial sum of money to really try and develop this idea. We're excited the fact that our colleagues in Ohio, that Denison, Kenyon, sometimes they're stealing some of these ideas from us at Oberlin. We're involved in a grant together where we're sharing some of these ideas, and they're very excited about some of the things that we've learned about trying to do course connections over the past 5 years. They're cross-divisional networks of courses organized around a common theme. The intent is to give pathways through the existing curriculum to allow more coherence and satisfying distribution. Distribution requirements haven't changed at OWU since, I think I traced it back to at least 1990. Sure, they're different for some of you in the room, but we still have students take a fair number of courses in each of the 4 divisions of the university, and this was to try and give them some coherence. It's a study of a topic or a problem from a variety of disciplinary perspectives. So again, it's coming back to that notion that not everything can be understood in the context of your major and through the lens of one discipline. It supplements existing courses with lectures, activities, discussions, and trips. And here are the examples. Right now, these are the course connections we're actually used. One focuses on American landscapes, and it involves faculty from all divisions, from art, from the sciences, the natural sciences. In fact, I had the pleasure of designing the whole experience. They turned the atrium in the Science Center into, I believe this year was the Upper Mississippi River, and thought about what that meant and what some of the connections were, and gathered a whole group of students, and they came up with this, I don't know the rules, this elaborate game that was trying to look at how do you make connections across understanding the different things that happen along that river. We also have one called Crime, Responsibility, and Punishment. We have one called Food, How Production and Consumption Shape Our Bodies, Our Cultures, and Our Environments. This course connection blends a lot of students interested in environmental studies and health and human genetics. There's a whole bunch of really interesting projects happening in the community through Chris Fink, who is one of our faculty members, who's very interested in health promotion and in food, that include students working with designing and working in the community with food education programs that are about how do you learn what is healthy, how do you help people figure out what is healthy eating, what are some of the issues, how does that play out more complexly when you start to bring in socioeconomic status and what are economic means and the complexity. And in fact, one of the things that they've done is they've interviewed lots of people involved in this food project. And it shapes them as much as it shapes the students and the people that they're working with. Another one is Modern Life and Its Discontent. A little bit more traditional, lots of things from philosophy to the sciences in there. I have joined them at some rather interesting film discussions. One of the things they like to do is show a film, get students and faculty to actually talk about what does it mean to live in this world, in this thing called this modern world, and what are some of the challenges on it? What does that mean for individuals? What does it mean for the choices that we make? Poverty, equity, and social justice probably has the most students involved. Food comes close, but there are lots of students involved in this. And it has typically gotten into the habit of doing a semester weekend field trip, of taking students to looking at places. They've done a lot of looking at how are the issues of poverty, equity, and social justice playing out in the city of Detroit. Close enough to us. They also look at some stuff in Columbus, but Detroit has been a very interesting location for them to look at. A more recent one is the Silk Road. I always talk about this. I mean, this has a long historical, it's part of the world, but it's really, in a broader context, not just about silk, although they actually do, if you participate in it, try and grow silkworms and try and actually learn some things about silk in that phase. But it's also that big question today about globalization. What happens when you lower the cost of bringing goods across borders? What happens when you lower the cost of having ideas that cross borders? And then the question of what happens when it's easier for people to cross borders. And also gets us to begin to recognize these are not new questions of globalization. There's a role for that historical experience, that historical understanding to be able to pursue those things. And the other one that's fairly recent is Water Rights and Rights. Notice the difference of spellings. That thinks about water in our world. And we know that water is going to be an increasing challenge in the 21st century, finding enough fresh water and how we deal with fresh water. We know that's even an issue worldwide. We know it's an issue not so much for us sitting here in Ohio, but we certainly know that parts of the US that are facing huge questions about what is water, what are the implications of that, and interestingly enough, I find it intriguing that one of the people involved in that is a ceramicist who spent some time developing how to use ceramics for some water purification devices to do that. It also turns out there are fascinating questions, certainly in parts of the world, about how do you bring fresh water into communities and what are the issues for women, so that you discover very quickly when you start to talk about water that the question gets bigger and has very broad implications. So it's a great way of students focusing their attention. Again, you'll notice lots of these have challenges and problems of the 21st century embedded in them. At the same time, as I said, we don't want people to be stuck just in the classroom and not applying their knowledge. So very generously, we provide students and faculty with funds that we call theory to practice grants. Now I got to cheat because I always forget my examples. I'm going to give you temporary examples. They change on me regularly. One of the other great things of my job is I get to read these. I get to read all the applications every year. There are only a couple of us who read every single one of them, but they are evaluated by a faculty committee, and they propose projects that are going to take theory, things they've learned in the classroom, and ask how do they apply in the world outside of the classroom. And many of these will involve international travel. They don't have to. Some support traditional laboratory research projects. So I believe these are all happening this spring, or might be happening this summer, because these are things that were funded from the last piece. So for example, we funded 2 students to spend 2 months in Morocco studying the farm-to-table aspects of traditional society. They're very curious about how does farm-to-table, we talk about that a lot in the US, work in a traditional society. And then they want to compare it when they come back to how does that play out in Delaware County? To understand a little bit better, are there things that we can learn environmentally from those traditional societies that play back into our world? We're sending a student to Puerto Rico to do a 3-week integration in San Juan to work with the Museum of the Americas. So it's sort of a nonprofit internship kind of experience to also help them better develop their Spanish, culture, and understanding of history of Puerto Rico, but through the process of actually engaging themselves in that community and making a contribution. One that was, I think, is fascinating, raised a certain challenge for us because we worry a lot about the safety of students, but we have a student who, to gain a better understanding of human trafficking, another one of the world's problems, is shadowing and volunteering with international justice missions in Bangalore, India, and a couple locations in India. And yeah, so we have lots of conversations. I can tell you, we have our international office does an evaluation. We have lots of conversations about safety and making sure people are aware of the risks that they're taking. But the committee felt that, given the organization that they were working with, that this was safe, that given the student understanding the risk, it was going to probably create an experience for that student that we could not create in any classroom on campus. A little bit more traditionally is we have a student who needed some funds to address how cold shock protein and hypothermia is indicators of cellular damage common to Alzheimer's disease as it plays out in rats. So very traditional, neat science, classroom-based research that we will help fund. In addition to that, these grants range probably anywhere from, per student, about $2,500 up to, I think, the most I've seen since I've been here is about $8,000 on a student in a very expensive neuroscience project that used a very expensive pharmaceutical that we constantly negotiated down from their original request of $15,000. And we're like, no, we don't have the resources to do that. We wish we did, but we worked with them on that. These are substantial. I mean, of travel opportunity. Travel can be expensive. The goal, theory to practice, is that we fully fund the project. Now, I will say to you, we don't always fully fund. We fully fund based on the budget and what they projected it was going to cost them. Many of them come back to us and say, well, we misestimated the cost, and then there's some negotiation. But at a smaller scale, because we realize that not everybody can be organized in advance on a project, that sometimes you're working with a student as a faculty member, and you want to do something quickly. We wanted to have a individualized projects that allow funds for things to happen on a small scale. And these are limited to $750, but wanted to assist students with independent study projects. So you have a student who says, I want to do some archival work, and I need to go down to Columbus 3 times a week. They can apply for this to get some funds to cover some of the travel expenses or parking expenses down there. That it also has some resources to provide funds for students to present the work that they do at professional meetings so that they're sharing in a broader context. And pays for supplies. We have bought horseshoe crabs for students. This year, working with one of our biologists, there have been a group of students doing projects that have been looking at soil and needed soil analysis, chemical analysis of soil, and this has helped pay for those kinds of projects. We've sent students to creative writing workshops with this, to dance workshops. Our only requirement is they have to have a project that comes out at the end. So if a student says they want to go to a creative writing workshop, we want them to produce a work that uses those skills that they're developed and share that with the community. Another one that was involved with students interested in the opening of the Simpson Quarry Fitness Center is a group of students out of HHK who wanted funds to understand the best practices in designing fitness centers to maximize student use. Because you can build things and they don't use it. So they wanted to go look at other colleges' fitness centers, look at the literature on how do you encourage use, but how do you actually see that? So these are funding those kinds of experiences for students. In addition to that, we have travel learning. And again, this is you'll notice the student individualized projects and theory to practice grants are educational experiences that students design, hopefully with the help of faculty. But they're playing a big role in designing that experience or taking their skills out of the classroom. Travel learning is a travel component embedded into a traditional course. It is typically designed by the faculty member as a way of enriching that kind of experience. And they're typically done over spring break or 2 weeks in May. In fact, we have 11 trips this spring. I believe 2 of those happened over spring break. That there are lots of people out traveling right now this very weekend. I know just coming in, I was talking with Chuck Delawana, who was making sure all the technology was working, and he's trying to hack because he's accompanying a group of students and a faculty member who are leaving for Japan on Monday. Saying it's a tough weekend, getting yourself ready for a 2-week experience. examples. And these are all, I think all of these are traveling right now, so I think they've all left. I know the first one has. Our Laurie Anderson in biology is looking at plant responses to global change, and they're in Brazil. They're looking at the Brazilian tropical rainforest ecosystem as a case study to explore interaction among plants, global environmental change, and human pressure on the environment, such as deforestation and agricultural expansion. You can talk and you can read about that in the classroom, but it's different to actually see it. And so they're going to get a chance to see it. Out of Black World Studies, Dr. Quay is taking students to South Africa to look at South Africa 2 decades after apartheid. And I will imagine, knowing him, that they can also will be talking a lot about what they're seeing there in those experiences with many of the events that have been occurring in the United States. So again, making those connections. Out of the English department, to give you a humanities trip, Dr. Camero is taking students right now slouching towards empire, the literary politics of Ireland. And I know that I think they've left, but they're off in Ireland, and they're going to the Republic of Ireland and North Ireland. They're going to see, of course, sites that relate to Ireland's literary history and present and consider the ways in which the island literatures and politics intersect. They will walk in the footsteps of Joyce's Bloom, follow the paths laid out in other works, but most importantly, they're going to actually meet authors of people that they've read and spend time with those authors. And so you get a great opportunity of those kinds of connections. When this works really well, we've also developed connections so that we can bring some of those people back to campus. And I've been pushing people to also do that, think about using technology, that we're now in a world where it's not very hard to bring somebody in for 35 minutes and have a conversation then with them, see them, and yet us be here, they can be in Ireland. I mean, this is a big change, and we're developing those human connections as people travel that allows us to build upon those when they come back. And so that fairly briefly was a whirlwind tour of the elements of the OU connection. I deliberately tried to leave time for you to ask questions so that I could then consult the dictionary of made up facts when I answer you. Again, remember, you gotta be able to tact. Go ahead.
I find it quite a compelling narrative, and makes me wish I was back here again. And I'm wondering, two-part question. What does the university do to kind of test the proposition that we're being successful in sort of achieving what you've described in terms of the making sense of the world and acting within it? And the second thing is, what is the university doing about continuing education to help graduates kind of stay relevant? And
let me take the first one, because I have to think about the second one. The first one is, I mean, it's the big question of assessment. And that starts with being very clear about what one's goals are. And each element of this, we probably do some assessment work. There's a very long report on theory to practice grants of whether they have the desired outcomes for students. Some do, some don't. I think we've learned things of how to increase the chances of that happening. I think one of the things we've learned there is that it requires more faculty engagement than we probably had early on in some of these experiences. On the travel learning, we've done some surveying of looking at what students would, kinds of experiences that they would do. I would say to you, this is an area of my concern that we're not doing enough of actually this kind of work. I will tell you, we are engaged in a project with the American Association of Colleges and Universities and actually some other GLCA schools that is trying to actually see whether some of this integration is really happening. We're in the early stages of that, where we're asking students to share with us works that they've collected, that they've done in classroom settings, to see whether they actually demonstrate the quality of writing that we'd like to see, the quality of critical thinking, and the quality of integration. And in fact, actually, what's neat about that project is we're going to look at our own students' work, but we're also going to have faculty at other institutions actually tell us whether they share the same understandings of those works. So it's a very good question. It's the challenge of higher education today more broadly at that local level. But then I think the other place where it will ultimately be tested is if I really believe that it's about learning how to set and make a difference in the world, it's going to be by the accomplishments of alums that we really need to look at and saying, what are they going to do? What are those outcomes that they have? I mean, we got the great pleasure of seeing some of the outcomes you've had in your particular lives in that, but some of the tests will be, do we actually produce leaders that make a contribution to society over the next 10 years? The second question, continuing at, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that's a question we've really spent a lot of time thinking deeply about, of what are some of those kinds of experiences about developing for continuing for alums to connect back into the institution. We've thought about modest things, but I think it's a good question that I will probably take to some people and say that it's probably worth some serious thought. I mean, I know that periodically there are conversations about whether we should offer travel learning experiences for alums, but I think that's probably small scale, probably not really getting at what you're talking about. And I worry a little bit about that because there are lots of institutions that take students traveling abroad and traveling. What I really think makes this program so unique is that it's really rooted in some classroom theoretical work before that experience. And so one of the challenges will be, although I think it can be done for alums, is how do you use technology in today's world to do some of this? We have not gone into what some places have done and gone into the massive online courses. We're early at the stage of thinking about does some online experiences make sense for our current students. I'm actually probably, I don't know if I'm in the minority on this. I actually believe that we should encourage and want every OU student today to have some side of learning experience that is primarily delivered online, because I know that going out away from us, the world's going to expect them to learn some things from some of these online experiences. I'm guessing if I were to pool alums, that a fair number of them in their jobs have been forced to do some online course for some credential, for some experience. In fact, we made all of our employees do that this fall, take an online course, a very short one, that had to deal with some issues of sexual harassment and sexual understanding of some of the issues that we're under, making sure from a training point of view. And so I actually see that that's actually a skill that students need to actually be able to do and have the discipline to complete things that are designed that way. But give you a long answer, didn't really answer your second question. I know that. Go ahead.
Oh, well, maybe I'll give my answer to that, which is that I think that the education at Ohio Wesleyan is an incubator for preparing us to continue our own education for the rest of our lives at wherever we are. I don't think it's the job of OU to provide that for us. I think if we didn't get it here, I'm remembering Dr. Davies, Ruth Davies said, don't you ever write back and ask me what books you should be reading. You know, she said, if we haven't done the job here to be able to prepare you to know where to look for books that you should be reading wherever you are, she said then she was feeling like that would have been a failure on the part of the university. I have a question about, because I love what you're telling us about the travel learning, and it does make me wish that I had had that opportunity myself. But the thing that I want to ask you about is what's happening on campus. I understand you could Skype people in, so you can use technology that way, but I'm remembering sitting at the feet of Robert Frost and having people on campus, the lecture series they had, the concert series where we got to hear just people that expanded my world, but it was here on campus. I remember the weeks of religious questioning that we did as a campus community where people came in. Is that still happening in any way, or do people just do it in internships and go away to have that experience?
Let me give you the multi-part thing. I'm not sure the last part of it. We certainly don't have chapel anymore, and the faith pieces, that's probably more hit and miss. But certainly, we still have lots of lecture series. We still have our Sagan National Colloquium that tends to be theme-based. I don't know that we do as many broadly recognized named speakers. The world has changed some. If you ever saw what some of the price tags on some of those people are, that raises all sorts of ethical questions of whether you want to spend the sums of money. I imagine today what a Robert Frost might be willing to command. But certainly there is, we do things with the performing arts. There are events that come in. You can probably find a talk on campus 3 to 4 times a week. One of the constant challenges is people ask, do we have too many because is it too diluted? I personally think a lot of that is healthy. I always say to people that some of my most meaningful educational experiences were the talk of someone where you actually have the chance to interact with that speaker. Not always did I recognize the name initially, but had that chance to interact. And so there is, I would say, almost every department has a couple speaker series that if you were to look at the OU Daily during the academic year, you would find many talks that students still could go to. Required not necessarily as much in that sense. We work pretty hard. I'm a big believer that I'd rather have people who want to be at an event, who are going to get something out of it, than those that I compel to be there, who sort of sit and act as dead wood at the event. So I try and get them to be engaged in it.
I like the words you use, like when you deal with crime and punishment, responsibility and punishment. That deals with the whole penal system and rehabilitation and all those things which are underneath that. The other thing I liked was the Silk Road with the idea of immigration ideas, where we base that. And I like the word areas of discontent, which is terrific. And when you think about Baltimore, you think, oh my gosh, we're right here in Delaware. So those are terrific. All those words are very expressive of a huge balloon of rainbow possibilities of student projects, which students which have a passion for that. And, I mean, it was a very small outline.
Well, to me, it's about. I mean, I look at it in today's world and want to build. I mean, I want to expand students' passions. I don't want to completely follow them, but I want to build upon that passion and that intellectual energy and find ways of connecting it with faculty's passions and intellectual energy. So I will tell you that one of the amazing things out of those course connections that I think if you were to talk to faculty is it was profound to them to be able to create this, of creating a mechanism that allowed them to start talking with other colleagues on campus outside of their disciplinary bounds. I mean, even though we're small, we still face that silo kind of thing that it's easy to see yourself in a limited way. And actually, faculty are often more guilty of this than students. Students actually make those, they don't necessarily make the connections. That I think that we often over-rely on, if you expose somebody to something, enough things, they'll figure it out. And that we don't make enough explicit to students and helping them make it explicit. But they're actually set up better sometimes than those of us who have lots of disciplinary training to see some of these broader things. And so we find it exciting.
Those are huge issues.
Yep.
Huge issues.
And I can tell you the crime and responsibility has a very strong neuroscience component too. So they're also thinking about how does this play out even within the brain.
What percentage of the students take advantage of these extra kind of things? That's the question.
What percentage of students take advantage of these extra kinds of things? It depends on the particular thing that we're actually talking about. We know that in the graduating class, we haven't calculated for the one that just graduated last weekend. The previous weekend, it is close, it's over 90% of students will have done some sort of individualized project or a capstone within their major or an internship or apprenticeship. So that's pretty good. Travel warning, in any particular year, I mean, I didn't tell you how that's funded, that to make that affordable right now, the university is picking up half the student's travel costs, the student picks up half the travel costs. So we'd love to be able to have the funds to send every student on a travel learning course every year. That's probably not realistic for us at this particular point. But it is about 8% of the student body in any particular year will participate in a travel learning course.
And how many travel learning opportunities are there? If somebody asked me, oh, you just went to Wesleyan, how many travel?
Of the formal course in a year, we're aiming between 130 to 150 travel spots in those classes that are doing that. That's what we're aiming. And the reason why it varies from year to year is because the program has an overall budget, and some trips are more expensive. We try and make sure that not all of them are international, because we want some to be domestic. And so, for example, we had a group that went to the 50th anniversary celebration in Selma over spring break. Next year, I'm really excited. We have a group, as part of American Landscape. We have 3 groups of 3 different faculty members taking 3 different classes to New Orleans. But one of the nice things about that is we can get a range of expenses for students. But when you go to Europe, I will tell you, even at half cost for a 2-week trip to Europe, it's going to be at least $2,500 for the student. And the real expensive ones, some of the ones in Asia get particularly expensive. It's just the cost of travel to certain places. So that's really been, I would say, somewhat the limiting feature, is 2 things, is what students have the means to pay for and what the university has the means to pay for.
Yeah, you mentioned one field 3 times, and that's neuroscience.
Mhm.
Now, is there some coordination? I mean, I don't think there's a department of neuroscience at this point, is there? But you mentioned it 3 times, as if this were a kind of field that's under investigation or something. I mean, it sounds very sophisticated.
It's actually fairly new to Ohio Wesleyan. We actually, from a fairly generous support, have, I believe we have 3 endowed positions in neuroscience that are we just hired the last one of those to start next fall. It's a growing area for us, and so it is a major.
Actually a department?
It's not a department, it's an interdisciplinary major.
Okay.
And in fact, actually, it was a conscious decision not to be its own department. And so each of the faculty involved in that program are also associated with the traditional program. And so it's been pretty exciting on campus. I've become aware of it because a lot of these student research projects in neuroscience tend to be more expensive than certain other programs. Mm-hmm. Just tends to use, different disciplines use different kinds of things what I see. Chemistry has some projects that are very expensive, but that tends to be in equipment, not necessarily in the supplies. And so, didn't mean to put that in there anymore, highlight neuroscience and other programs, but they've been pretty active in taking advantage of some of these opportunities.